Are you ready?
Okay, yep, first question.
Do you find that most African American stereotypes regarding crime are statistically justifiable?
No, based on the research that I found during the class, it's shown that whites of the same socioeconomic class as African Americans are just as likely to commit the same crimes. Statistically, higher crime rates are within the lower class, and because such a high percentage of African Americans um, are lower class, this affects the percentage of the overall population of African Americans who participate and are convicted of crimes.
With all the talk about racism in politics today, do you feel that there is a decline or an incline in racism among the general population?
I think that nowadays it's becoming increasingly unpopular to be racist and to make such comments. So I believe that overall, the open racism and the open racist comments are going to decline. However, I'm not sure as far as the concealed racial comments as to whether or not those will eventually go away. But I think that as more pressure is put on the general population to uh, not do that, it will eventually affect and hopefully decrease all racism. Okay, so the matrix of domination is numerous aspects of society that keeps uh, people oppressed and unable to uh, move up and um, improve their circumstances. So various aspects of this can include their education. These people are more likely to drop out of high school and are um, less likely to be able to afford college, and so they are not able to increase or better their standing in that way. Other aspects can be family. A lot of these people have higher rates of divorce and um, are more likely to be abused or neglected, uh, more likely to uh, have teen pregnancy, things like that. Um, Also, other things that can impact this is health. These people are more likely to have more health problems, be less likely to be able to afford um, their health care, and also oftentimes their work circumstances and things like that also can impact their health status. These people tend to also have higher crime rates. Also, housing, they tend to have um, lower um, housing, but then also they're more likely to experience hazards. They're more likely to live in downtown areas, things like that, things where there's a lot of overcrowding, a lot of a lot of pollution, things like that. And all of these things work together and can impact different categories within the matrix of domination, which can cause this oppression to continue not only through the lifetime of that individual, but also through um, their children, and also generally it has affected their parents and things like that. Okay, so as far as the other areas that I'm supposed to cover, the first thing would be human variation. In this case, what we did in class was we watched a video that discussed the genetics involved in racism. A lot of people say that they're a completely different class. Um, it was a belief in the early days that we were completely different species. But genetics have shown that very small amount is of general appearance can actually be or determine what our genetics are going to look like. So although African Americans look different in being darker than us, having different hair types, different eye structures, things like that, overall, genetically, they are just as different from us as many whites are. And there's not enough variation to say that there's any difference. You can't look at somebody's genetic structure and say it's race or that race or things like that. So race is essentially a human idea and has no genetic backing or scientific backing. Another thing is ethnic conflict, which is essentially, the issues among the different racial groups. As far as African Americans go, that can involve things like discrimination. In the past, there's been racial issues as well, especially after or during slavery as well as afterwards. There's been many issues where they were attacked for their differences, and because they were thought of being as more primitive than, say, the white general population. And then the other, this is primarily based on immigration. So this is based on the ideas that Americans had who already lived here. So whites that had been here for generations were the first colonials, things like that. The ideas that they had when other races started coming over. And this could even involve different English groups. So there was a lot of issues with the Irish when they came over, and things like that. But as far as African Americans, they had a very different light, because unlike other racial groups where they came over of their own free will, African Americans were brought over as slaves from Africa and had no real choice in the matter. Also, they were viewed, like I said earlier, as being inferior, being one step above apes, essentially. And because of the things that whites did to break down African Americans and things like that, they really tried to tear their identity away from them to make them more
subdued.
Yeah, more subdued. More subdued and more trainable, essentially. They wanted them to be broken down so that they would do what they were supposed to do. And so because of that, because of the very strong views that whites had on African Americans, it's impacted them even to this day, as far as their culture and the overall views. So we still have problems with racism, we still have problems with discrimination, and these stereotypes that have built up over time, because as the whites used the slaves and things like that, they worked very hard to make them sound more primitive. So men were portrayed as brutish and violent and evil, and needed to be trained and restricted and things like that. And so even then, now we see that a lot still within our criminal justice system, where African Americans are more likely to receive harsher punishments and things like that than whites who commit the same crime. Okay, so as far as stereotypes and things like that, some of the main stereotypes for African Americans is, like I said earlier, the men being brutish and violent, but then also you have the women who are labeled as lazy and welfare mothers, but this can be considered incorrect in most instances. Many of these women are very hardworking. They strive to make a living. However, because of the things in the matrix of domination where they are still subject and can't get out from under the poverty class and the lower class, they still need a lot of help, things like that, because of higher crime rates in the lower class, as well as the elevation in crime as far as African Americans are considered. It leaves many of these women without husbands to help care and provide for the family, so they are having to do the work of two parents. As far as prisons and things like that, because in my opinion, I believe that the higher crime rates in African Americans also has a lot to do with stereotypes. Because they are labeled as this, they tend to get harsher punishments than whites for the same crime. They tend to get longer sentences, and also 1 in every 3 African Americans are arrested within their lifetime, just showing how the criminal justice system has also been impacted by these stereotypes. And so that causes a lot of issues also, like I said earlier, because of the high percentage of African Americans in poverty, and because of the higher rates of crime in that class. We see a lot of issues with that. Unfortunately, that also works against or with the stereotypes, in that people don't tend to look at whites within that class, but tend to focus on the racial minorities such as blacks and Hispanics, thus causing a lot of problems with that. Okay, so to finish up, can racism be eliminated? I personally believe, after going through this class and doing all this research, I believe that one day racism can be eliminated. However, I don't see that happening in the near future. I believe we have a long way to go, just because of the stereotypes and also the matrix of domination, and also just all of the conflicts that we're still having and things like that. Just the ideas of so many people in society and their views on African Americans, whether they realize they have them or not, can impact them and will take a long time to eradicate. We've come a long way since slavery, and even since the end of segregation and things like that, but it's still going to take a long time to work that out of the system completely. As far as other minorities as well and things like that, we have to overcome these stereotypes before we're ever going to be able to make a significant difference and get rid of racism, as far as believing that we are so different, when in most cases we've all lived in the same country, done the same things, grown up learning the same ideas and same ideals, but we're still considered different. And so it's going to take a long time to realize that we're all the same and we all have the same goals and values and things like that, as far as progression and the improvement of society as a whole.